Good morning. We've got sunshine today. Always puts me in a better mood when the sun shines. That's why I live in Pittsburgh. No, it's one of the downsides to Pittsburgh is, but anyway, so we are moving right along. We're actually a little bit ahead of the schedule, remarkably. But what I'm going to do is our test will still be given when it's scheduled. What this will do is will give us a little bit of time for you to digest the material and also to come up with questions to ask me. We will be in person next week. And so as a result of that, I want you to be thinking, looking at the study guide. I posted a study guide, and make sure you start looking at that and get ready. We have a lot of material we have covered, and that's what we're going to be going over. So be thinking about things to ask me when we're in person. That's the easiest way to do it. And then if there are other questions, you can either do it through email or through one of these back and forths. Maybe I've been throwing around the idea of maybe having a live meeting, possibly Wednesday of next week, both a morning version and an afternoon version, depending on when. And you could, quite honestly, attend either one depending on your schedule. But if I do that, I'm not going to pull out PowerPoints and go through 4 weeks of PowerPoints. I'm going to be sitting here saying, okay, what are your questions? And as soon as there are no questions, we'll be done. So it will be on you if we do that. And so that's tentatively, we'll be planning on doing that. All right, so where are we exactly? We have gotten to the brain. So we've been talking about the nervous system here for a while, for 2.5 weeks, something like that. And we've gotten to the brain, and we are going to, and we have kind of a funny picture that at the very beginning. You can tell these slides were a little bit old because they used to have a Geico commercial, and this picture of a dissected cat's brain and spinal cord with attached eyes reminded me of that commercial. So anyway, we talked about the spine last time, and we're going to spend 2 class periods, 2 lecture times, talking about the brain. And last time we had talked about the meninges in the spinal cord, and we are going to and you have basically the same layers, the same meningeal layers. So on the outside, we have the 3 layers, right? The 3 layers of the meninges. You have on the very fine, delicate layer that lays against the brain, and that's the pia mater. And then we have a space and then another layer, which is the arachnoid mater. And so the space in between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater is the subarachnoid space. It's important, that's why I'm mentioning it. We'll talk about cerebrospinal fluid is going to be circulating in that area. And then we have another layer above, which is the dura mater and the subdural space. And we don't give any particular emphasis to it, but obviously it's there. And then above that, the epidural space. So now when we talk about the dura mater on the brain, what we find is that it is divided in half. It's cut into 2 layers in a couple of places. And so we have this outer layer and an inner layer, and then that means that we have a sinus there, right? So we have a dural sinus, which is between the periosteal and the meningeal layers, so of the dura mater. So the dura mater is a single layer, but it's split, and this is the dural sinuses, and they are filled with blood. And so we have one of them that is going there between the hemispheres of the brain. So I'm sure everyone has seen pictures of brains, and so it's kind of, split with a line down the middle, right? And so you got the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Well, splitting those in half, we have the phalanx cerebri. So the phalanx cerebri is where that is separated apart, and we have that space in between, which, what do we call it? The dural sinus. And then we have another, if you remember, there's that other part that's below there. It's called the cerebellum. So we have two cerebral hemispheres, and then the cerebellum, which is divided into hemispheres as well. So we have some spaces for them as well. We have the phalanx cerebelli, which splits the two cerebellar hemispheres. And then we have the tentorium cerebelli, which is a horizontal opening, spacing there as well. And again, we had said this is where the dura mater, that outer tough layer covering the brain, has separated into two layers. So we have the sagittal sinus that is between there, and then we have the transverse sinus, which is, I'd said that we have the tentorium cerebelli. So it's a horizontal layer that goes sort of on the sides, right? So it's horizontal, and that is producing the transverse sinus. Now, why am I talking about these blood-filled sinuses here when I said we're going to be talking about the brain? Well, you might remember I said just a minute ago, if you have good short-term memory, you probably remember I said in the subarachnoid space, we're going to have cerebrospinal fluid circulating. So we're going to talk next about cerebrospinal fluid and where it's found in the brain and it's through the central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord. And so all around your brain and all around the spinal cord, we have this cerebrospinal fluid. And in the spinal cord, you might remember there's this central canal. There is, anyway, whether I've even mentioned it, I don't know. But there's like this central canal. And I normally don't have to mention it because we would have already been studying this in lab, but we haven't had a lab yet. So anyway, in the middle of the cross-section of the spinal cord, there's a little hole down the middle, and that's called the central canal. So cerebrospinal fluid is there in that middle hole, and on the outside, under the arachnoid mater in what we call the subarachnoid spaces. And so we have this circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. All right, so if we continue up that central canal, up the spinal cord into the brain, we can look at this picture right here. And so here we have this, there's the central canal there, and then we have some spaces in the brain that we call ventricles. And this is where the cerebrospinal fluid is going to be produced. in many cases. It's produced in a number of cases, but it's produced in these ventricles as one of them. So we have lateral ventricles. So it's hard to show them in a picture, but if you think of me, you're looking at my brain, and I've said we have this central canal coming up, and there's a fourth ventricle and a third ventricle here on the midline, right? So, and then outside, lateral to that, we have two lateral ventricles. And you'll be able to see it. When we're looking at the brain in lab, you'll be able to see, oh, there's a hole extending out in either direction into the brain. And these are the two lateral ventricles. And then when you have the two halves of the brain and you put them together or pull them apart, you'll see there's a little space in between here and a little space in between here. And these are the third and fourth ventricle. You have two laterals. We don't call them 1, 2, but they are. And then 3 and 4. So lateral ventricles, third ventricle, fourth ventricle, continuous with the central canal. You end up, the cerebrospinal fluid is produced, we'll talk about where it's made in the next slide, but it's filling these spaces, and you produce about 500 milliliters of this stuff a day, and at any given time, you have 100 to 160 milliliters in circulation. So, if at any given time you have, we'll just use that bit higher number, 160 milliliters, that means that's about a 30%, or that's a good chunk of what is made during the day. But that means that this stuff is being made and being reabsorbed back to where it came from. Now, where in the heck did it come from? It came from the blood. Cerebrospinal fluid is derived from what we call blood plasma. Blood plasma is the liquid part of the blood. And so you make cerebrospinal fluid, it circulates around, and then it's absorbed back into the circulatory system as blood plasma. I'm going to pick up that thought here in a minute. I'm going to go on and stop right here. We'll come back with slide number 4.